the UK Supreme Court will rule tomorrow on whether Scotland can hold a new independence referendum without the UK government's consent. Legendary actor Brian Cox is back in the hot seat here and has been one of the fiercest and most famous advocates for breaking up the union. Brian, good evening. How are you?
I'm good.
Let me before we get into.
Actually, ironically, I don't want to break up the union, but I've got another idea for the union.
Go on.
United Federation.
What, explain.
Independent countries working in Wales, Ireland, Scotland, and England, because I think England gets a lot of the tap end of the bath. I'm by nature an Anglophile. That's where I studied here in London, so I'm very disposed to that. What I just believe in is the independent states, but we come together as a united federation.
Is that not what the UK is supposed to be?
But it's not, because too many decisions are made on behalf of, like this major decision that's been made in Wales about this Chinese thing, whether it's supposed to be contentious. There's a dangerous element, they say. But the Welsh are getting no say in the matter, which I think is really wrong. So I'm all for... I don't want to break up the union because it's, we are the British Isles. But I want my country, not just my country, I want Wales, Scotland, and England to be independent.
I mean, what's interesting, we had a lot of debate, obviously, about whether to leave the European Union. And a recent survey this week in YouGov says now only 32% of Britons now think it was the right thing to do to leave. 56% think it was wrong. That's a massive shift.
Absolutely. But that was so corrupt. I mean, so rotten, the whole thing. And we, Scotland, voted 62% to stay.
Yes, I know. But does that not give you pause for thought about leaving a collective entity, which brings with it at least strength in numbers, is the argument?
But the north of England, who have been systematically ignored time and time again, are getting, they're well cheesed off about the fact that they don't have enough say in their life, And you think of the great things that Andy Burnham's doing in Manchester, for example. And I'm all for the England expressing themselves in the same way that Scotland does, and that we come together in a proper federation where we contribute. We don't do that now because the rules are all set down here.
And the problem, I think, if I was Scottish right now, given the utter fiasco of the way this government has behaved in the last 6 months alone, from Boris Johnson...
We both agree upon that
one. We went on Question Time and
we did.
Equally raged. But it has been completely shameful that we've had these three prime ministers now. Boris Johnson, total shambles with all the nonsense he got up to. Liz Truss, unbelievably, for that short 44 days, even worse, tanking the economy, tanking the pound, tanking everything, and now we're picking up the pieces. And now Rishi Sunak has to try and repair all the damage. But if I'm Scottish looking at all this, I'm thinking, look at these London politicians behaving like reckless casino owners with our money, and we have no real say over what these people are doing.
That's my point. You've just made my point.
Well, I agree, but I see that's where I have sympathy.
No, and that's the whole point. But the problem is that systematically again and again and again we'll have those guys and those gals making those decisions. I don't know what's going to happen in the next election. I suppose that probably Labour will get in. But we need vision. We need real vision. And those creatures were just
Who do you see out there that you think is actually an impressive politician who might have a vision?
Well, I believe in Nicola Sturgeon.
Do you?
I do. Yes, I do. I think, and they've had a lot of problems up there.
You're right.
Don't get me wrong. They've had a lot of problems. But I do trust Nicola. I think she's the genuine article.
I mean, I'm going to say, in her credit, she's always faced the music. I've done many interviews with her, often quite hostile. She always comes back. She doesn't duck interviews like Boris did for so many years. Yeah. She's divisive, but she certainly has what I would call leadership skills.
Exactly. And she's a great leader, and I think she will lead us. But as I say, Piers, and I really mean this, and people say, oh, you go on about independent Scotland. I'm interested in the countries in this country, and this kingdom, so-called United Kingdom, being separate, being individual.
So completely autonomous, but they also are part of a federation.
Exactly. That's exactly what I feel.
But in the federation, I mean, who would have any power in that? Would it be equal powers?
No, it would be equal power, and there would be...
What would the federation decide that the independent, autonomous countries couldn't decide for themselves?
Well, most of the stuff domestically they could decide for themselves, but when it comes to the interchange with each country, then they would have to come to some kind of agreement. It won't be easy, but it never is.
What do you do, for example, about currency? Because it would take you years to go back into the EU, which is still, I think, what more Scots would prefer to do, but it would take years to facilitate. Well, the Bank of England have said if you leave the UK, you can't have the pound. So what do you do? It's practical level. What do you do?
Well, it's a thing that one has to encompass. You're going to have to deal with it one way or the other. But then again, we didn't go euro. We kept the pound during this whole situation. So we never made that. We never made that transition. I don't know what would happen in terms of. But then, if we had a united federation, we would come to some decision on that very subject. That's what we would do.
What about the border? Because we've had this nightmare from Brexit of Northern Ireland and what to do with it. There's this belief that if Scotland really wants independence, you've got to sort of rebuild Hadrian's Wall. Are you going to be standing there with your marauding armour, fending off the invading English?
No, that's...
The new William Wallace. You got a bit of Wallace about you.
Yeah, I know. I actually played William Wallace on television 100 years ago.
Perfect casting.
But no, I think that...
But what do you do? Practical level, what do you do about a border if you are a genuine independent country?
Well, how do you deal with a border between Belgium and France? How do you deal with a Belgium between France and Spain?
Would you have a physical border?
You would just have the border. It would be there. It would be at Hadrian's Wall, which is a natural border.
Do you think, when you go up to Scotland, what's the mood about, would you say? Because the polls at the moment do not see a majority in any of the polls for wanting to have an independent Scotland, or indeed another referendum. So why do you believe you're nearer to it now than you were?
Well, I just think because, certainly in Scotland's, it changes daily, because there's always... And the Scots are notoriously contentious. They can be very contentious, the Scots. I know because I am one. I was watching Peter Capaldi the other night, and he said, the great gift of my family was family and sarcasm. And I think that's very true. Sorry, what was your question again?
No, my question is, the mood, what is it about the mood in Scotland, do you think, which makes you think the polls are wrong? Well, people do want to have a genuine independent country.
Because we've seen what's happened recently, which has been pretty horrific, with Johnson, Truss, very briefly. Did somebody else come in? Well, it's now Richie Sunak, So, and that party has just gone from worse to worse to worse to worse to worse. So we don't want any truck with that. We're like Blanche Dubois. We're always depending on the kindness of strangers. And in a way, we just need to be able to form. And also it's to do with culturally who we are. We're culturally different. We're not the same. And, when I grew up in Scotland, it was North Britain. And the great thing about Scotland, and the SNP party was regarded as a joke, but they have moved towards. You see, why I became part of Scottish. I don't like the word nationalist. I've never liked the word national, but I believe in Scottish independence. Nationalist is too contentious a word for me. But when Blair made the whole fiasco, which we're still suffering from in the Middle East, and he got into bed with, Cheney and Rumsfeld and the puppet, as he was really, Bush, and Halliburton and oil. I just thought it's so obvious that this is a corrupt thing that's happening, and we should not be part of it. Now, in Scotland, we would say, no, we're not going to do that. But of course, we have no power. We had no power to make any opinion. And I was a Labour man for a long time, and I'm still a socialist in principle. But at the end of the day, that's why I think we have to come back to ourselves.
It was interesting. I mean, you brought up Iraq. I was editor of the Daily Mirror. We opposed the Iraq war. We lost the campaign, sadly. But when you look at this furore in Qatar, what do you make of it? Because my argument is that I'm not sure we are morally pure enough here to really be talking to the Qataris about how their laws are or anything else.
Well, I think to a certain extent you're right. But I also think that I think what's happening, let's look at Iran, and let's look at what's happening in Iran, where there's a sort of possible female revolution, and it's being led by women. See, I do think the patriarchy is over, and I think we need to give these women the rights that they deserve, and we haven't done it. And I think that goes for most of the Middle Eastern nations, but that's also to do with religion. We don't go into that, but certainly these women need to be freed up in a way that they're not being freed up.
How would Logan Roy react to the patriarchy being over?
He would do something else, because he's But I also think, going back to the question of Qatar, that should have been dealt with a long time ago. I mean, Sepp Blatter has already admitted it was a corrupt thing.
Yeah.
So we know it was corrupt, but they should have dealt with it a long time ago, not now. This is not the point.
But see, when I had that debate before, I spoke to you with Arsaka. I mean, when you actually do try and work out where is morally pure enough to have a World Cup.
Iceland.
Right. I mean, you're pretty much in Iceland every year, right?
Yeah.
And even there, if we dug deep enough with all the world's journalists, you'd probably find all sorts of problems there.
Well,
my point being that it's tricky, right? You can't just obviously have it in Iceland every year.
You could. Well, it's not every year, it's every 4 years.
But why shouldn't the Middle East have a World Cup?
Well, I think they should have a World Cup, but there's a lot of stuff that's gone on. I mean, the Saudis beat Argentina yesterday.
Incredible.
But then think of what the Saudis did to that journalist in Turkey.
Of course.
Exactly. So
But is that any more morally repugnant than us illegally invading Iraq?
Well, we haven't done that kind of thing. We haven't actually.
Well, we illegally invaded a sovereign country and 1 million people died.
That's what we did. We did it.
I mean, I'm not sure there's a moral difference, to be honest.
Yeah, but just because there wasn't a moral difference doesn't mean to say you have to not abandon that issue and just saying perhaps there needs to be a bit of morality in dealing with things.
Let's take a short break. I want to come back. You're a Manchester United fan.
I am.
And you saw the Ronaldo interview?
I did. Great interview.
I'm going to get your reaction to Ronaldo after the break. Welcome back to Piers Morgan Uncensored. Brian Cox is still with me. Brian, you're a Man United fan, the biggest star arguably United's ever had. Cristiano Ronaldo went public in this big interview with me. Let's just have a reminder of some of the things he said. Trying to force you out, you guess.
Not only the coach, but the other 2 or 3 guys there around the club.
At the senior executive level?
Yes, that I felt betrayed. I don't know what's going on, but since the Sir Alex Ferguson left, I saw not evolution in the club. The progress was zero. The Glazers, they don't care about the club. The empathy with the coach is not good. I'm honest.
You don't have a good relationship with him?
I'm not mean good relationship.
Do you think he respects you?
I think he don't respect the way I should deserve.
Well, you must have been worried sick. I mean,
I was very worried.
You lost your baby son, and now your baby daughter's in hospital.
Exactly. Kind of that didn't believe that something going wrong, which is make me feel bad.
Really?
Yes. They
didn't believe you.
They believe you, but in the same way, their piece ever gonna change the health of my family for the football. Never.
Cristiano Ronaldo, that interview's now been viewed 15 million times on our YouTube channel. 45 million more views of the clips on social media, making it one of the biggest, most watched interviews in history, certainly for sport. What did you make of it, Brian? I mean, Cristiano Ronaldo, United legend, torching really the club. What did you think?
Well, I think I can see where he's coming from. But he also has to understand that it is not Alex Ferguson anymore. It's not that United. And I could see that there was probably a great sentimental movement to go back to the club where he really began, where it all began. And Alex, well, there's nobody like Alex Ferguson.
And Alex persuaded him.
And Alex persuaded him to come back.
Yeah.
Well, thinking, naturally, because Alex loves the club, he's trying to keep the club. But the club has gone through so many changes in the last few years. Now, playing for Juventus and playing for Real Madrid, and their clubs have been in an incredible, they haven't stopped, they're just the top of the league. Manchester United has not been playing well over the last few years, but it's beginning to get its mojo back. And I think it's unfortunate that this has happened. And
is he entitled to speak out, do you think?
Well, of course he's entitled to speak out. But also one has to examine exactly where he's coming from. And I think he's coming from a place where he's saying, I wanted to go back to a beginning. I wanted to go back to that glory days where I was a young boy. And I understand
He said his heart ruled his head to a degree.
His heart ruled his head to a degree. And in a sense, that's going to be difficult, and a manager who's trying to create a new club, and there's going to be a clash.
Yeah.
And I think it's quite tragic, actually, and it's tragic for him, but it's also tragic for the club.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the club has to be given a break on this. I mean, I do think it's hard. It's clearly hard because his expectation must have been huge. And especially if Alex persuaded him to go back, that must have been a huge thing. But he's been disappointed. And you can't take away his disappointment because it is not the same club that he was at all those years ago. And
have you ever had a situation in your career when you've been tempted to walk out? Or have you walked out of a show, a play, a TV show, anything like that?
No. I'm clever enough to avoid going into those situations.
Have you seen people do it?
Yeah, I've seen people walk away, and I've understood why they do it, and it's usually complex reasons.
I mean, I did it, actually.
Well, yeah.
But I did it because actually, when I listened to Ronaldo, I sort of thought, it actually comes down to respect. I think it doesn't matter what the job is, if you actually feel disrespected in your workplace.
That's right.
And you feel you're being forced down an alleyway you don't want to go down. I actually think there's a certain merit in just saying, actually, it's not for me.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe. I'm glad the interviews had the coverage that it's had in terms of. I mean, amazing. 15 million is quite incredible. But at the same time, I'm going. It's rather sad that that's the view you're going to get because, I think, and certainly with his kids and with his family and. Going back to Manchester is a difficult thing.
I think losing the baby in the tragedy with the twins and one died and one lived, that's got to really get to any human being. And also, I think he wanted a bit more of an arm wrap.
Yeah, and he didn't get it.
Yeah.
And that's...
It may just really be as simple as that.
Yeah.
Talking of arm wraps, extraordinary series you've got on Channel 5, How the Other Half Live, both rich but particularly pertinently, I thought, the poor. And you went down for this series... You went to food banks. I want to show a little clip first and ask you about this.
Well, actually...
I come here every Friday so that I can feed my son over the weekend. We're working part-time and we still can't afford anything. Yeah. My electricity has gone up from £44 a month to £170 a month.
That's astronomical.
It really is hard going, it really is. We prioritise our children and go without, and I think that's what all adults and parents are doing just now, really, isn't it?
It's shocking how Dundee's gone pretty much full circle, getting back to the poverty I saw as a kid. It's extremely painful, this stuff. It's painful for anybody. If you've got any sensibility at all, this stuff is painful.
So they weren't, you just corrected me there, they weren't food banks, they're called community larders. Explain the distinction.
Well, the difference is what people feel about food banks is loss of dignity.
Yeah.
And the one thing that human beings have, even when they don't have any money, is some kind of dignity, some kind of feeling of well-being of who they are. And what the community larder does is it charges the minimal, but it means you're paying for something. So there's a transaction.
You're not being given it.
You're not being given it, and it's not begging, because a lot of being in food banks feels like begging. And the fact that they're being constantly legitimized is really irksome to me. But this community larder, run by these two amazing women who actually ran a playgroup, and it was out of a playgroup they decided to go on to this. And people like Lidl, Morrison's, they give stuff which is coming up to its sell-by date that then they can tap on. And the thing that you don't see in the programme, which is one of my angers with my editors, in that, anyway, that's neither here nor there. But the thing you don't see is a guy who came in at the community larder. He was called Peter Leet. He came in and he was a frail man with a stick and he had a sign on his arm. And I said, so you do this for your family? And he said, no, I do it for people who can't get here.
It was 15 people he did it for, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. He said, I do it for them. He said, and I said, really? He said, yeah. I said, that's amazing. He said, I do sort of 5 a week. I do different groups, people who can't, older people who can't get down from the high rises. I said, that's extraordinary. And I said, so what's this sign? He said, I'm blind. And I just almost fell off my chair. I just thought...
But you got quite tearful, actually.
I did, because I just thought the heroism of this guy, this guy's a real hero. And I just thought, wow, this man has really given something of his life to this horrible situation and trying to make it better for other people.
So many people in this country, in the whole of the UK, are now literally on the poverty line.
Yeah.
And it's probably going to get worse before it gets any better. 11% inflation, this energy crisis, the war in Ukraine, all these things conspiring, the fallout from the pandemic. You saw at the sharp end. I mean, you went back to your hometown and you were horrified by what you found. What do we do about this?
It's a big question. It's a big issue. I think independence would help.
Do you?
I do.
In Scotland's case?
Certainly in Scotland's case, but I also think elsewhere it would help.
I mean, it would only help if the economy was revived.
That's right.
And many economists think that Scottish independence would be bad for the Scottish economy.
No, well, I would argue with that, but I haven't got the time to do that here. But no, I mean, I feel that we're going from bad to worse. But we've again and again and again, we have neglected our own. And it's suddenly at a bad time now when everything is against us, the cost of living crisis, what have you, the war, the pandemic, what the pandemic has done. But even so, their lives haven't changed. The budget didn't help them, those people, and it never does. It never does. It never looks to the poorest. We don't concern ourselves with that. They're an embarrassment. Let's put them over there. But now, and why I wanted to do this program was to bring it to the fore and say, these people matter, and we have to do something about it. We have to have some attitude that we haven't got, that we've kind of elbowed so long, for too long, actually. And that's what I feel.
It's powerful stuff, and I commend people to watch it. How the Other Half Live on Channel 5. Can't let you go without asking you about Succession, one of my favourite shows ever in the history of television. You've got a new series coming in the new year. Can you tell me anything, or do you have to shoot me?
Piers, I don't have a gun. But if I did, you'd have to be shot.
Is Logan Roy in Series 6?
Well, there isn't Series 6. We're only Series 4.
I know. It's a trick question.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, let's see what happens. I mean,
in other words, does he survive this series?
Well,
it's 4 you're doing now, so it's been...
Yeah, he'll survive this series.
Yeah.
No, there'll be no problem about that.
There's no death we have to...
No, none of that. No, that's all speculation and nonsense. No, I mean, there's a lot to be dealt with in terms of who's going to take over, and there's a lot to be dealt with in terms of the writers and where they can go with it. See, the great thing about Jesse Armstrong is he doesn't stay too long at the fair.
Right.
Because each season has topped the last season. So we have to keep topping.
But it reminds me of Aaron Sorkin on The West Wing, where the first 4 seasons were fantastic. Then he left and the writing collapsed and the whole thing...
And that's what we don't want to happen.
Yeah. Would you rather end on a high?
I would rather end on a high.
Yeah.
And
leave them wanting more, not less.
Yes, and there's I'm no names, no pacto, but there's a show called Billions, and Damian Lewis left, and they're still going on with it.
Yeah, I know.
But it's
over-egging the souffle. That's what I would call.
A wee bit.
How many times a day do you get told to tell people to F off?
All the time.
Like a dozen times a day?
I was at the Scottish BAFTAs last night, and I couldn't get away from people. And of course, it's, as I said before, it's the best thing to tell people.
Yes.
Because when you're fed up with them, you go, oh,
You can say it. We'll bleep you.
Oh, don't bother me anymore. Just the off.
And finally, as a Scot, who do you most want to win the World Cup? England or Wales? Or somebody else?
I have to reserve judgment on that.
Oh, come on, Tom. Get off the fence.
No, I'm not. I can't do that.
Do you want England to beat, say, the United States?
I think I'd like to see England do well because I think he's done a great job.
Southgate.
Yeah, I think he's really done a great job. And there's some great players. We've got a few good Arsenal players in there.
Yeah,
well,
Saka on fire.
Saka, what a player.
Tremendous.
I was worried about him because he got... a couple of games ago, they took his legs from him, and I thought, God.
He's made a tough stuff at Arsenal.
Yeah.
Brian, brilliant to see you.